Greetings, greetings. We'll be starting shortly. Is that a member of the riot squad that's got in early? If you're new to the bird emergency, our regular chatters are the riot squad. Why the riot squad, you ask? Because the riot squad is a group of kookaburras. And kookaburras are some of our favourite birds here in Australia, where I am, Wurundjeri country. G'day bird nerds, I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. While the summertime is going on, we're replaying some of the conversations that I've had over the last little while. This one is with a very nice gentleman called Bennett Hennessey, who works in Bolivia for the American Bird Conservancy. And we're going to talk about the Ariape Manikin, which is a highly specialised, critically endangered bird, and it lives in a specific type of habitat at a specific altitude, and its habitat has been encroached upon, and there was a crowdfunding campaign to buy some of its critical habitat, which was successful. A coordinated partnership of groups, including the American Bird Conservancy. So we're just going to be, I'm going to be here, so you can comment, question, anything. But basically, it's the conversation we had. You'll notice it was at the height of the lockdowns, I think, and business was bad. I was at the bones of my bum I think is the saying here, on the bones of my bum. But anyway, I was still talking to people about birds. So here we go. We want this to basically be here, don't we? I might put myself there, and I'll probably pull myself out of the stream. Anyway, here we go. Bird Emergency. I am Grant Williams. This is the show where I talk about rare birds with people who get to work with rare birds who know an awful lot more about birds than me. Today, we're going to be talking about this. That's right. It's the Ariape Manikin and Bennett Hennessey, who is the Brazil program coordinator with the American Bird Conservancy, is joining me. Hi, Bennett.
Hello.
How are you going?
Pretty
How
good.
are you? There we go. Oh, I'm glad we're not going live. Let me get rid of that, and we'll put us both up. There we are. There we are. So, Bennett, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. It's been a bit of a bit of a journey to get us both together in the same time zone and at the right time, because not only do you work on the birds in Brazil, but you also spend a bit of time in other jurisdictions working on birds. So, can you tell us a little bit about your role with the American Bird Conservancy? Actually, tell us what the American Bird Conservancy is.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm Bennett Hennessey. I'm a Canadian. I live in Santa Cruz de la Sierra in Bolivia, and I work for the American organization, American Bird Conservancy, and I'm the program coordinator half time for Brazil. The other half time I work for Bolivian bird conservation group. An American Bird Conservancy is, as its name, an organization, a charity organization designed to work on the conservation of birds in the Americas, pretty much, with the priority being to avoid extinctions. That's our number one goal. And so my job with American Bird Conservancy is looking at Brazil and looking at the conservation priorities in Brazil. About 10 years ago, we put together a strategy looking at some of the best partners in Brazil. One was Save Brazil, the other one is Aquasis, which we'll be talking about today. And we're looking at what are the species that absolutely need attention. I mean, everything needs attention, but we have to look at limited resources. And so where can we make sure, especially that we don't lose species, and how we can have sort of good plans for a future positive conservation effect in Brazil.
So the bird we're talking about today is in a, well, I would think from the point of view of most people, an absolutely perilous state. But there's been some good news since about 2014 with this bird. But I want you to help set the scene.
Yeah.
I was reading some of the material that you sent me, and in 2004, even though there had not been really significant survey work done, the population estimate was 40 birds. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the estimate. Yes.
And then over time, the population was known to be a little bit more. But while that survey work was being done in the early 2010s, you had one of the most severe droughts in recorded history in Brazil. So 2 or 3 years of extreme drought. Now, we're no strangers to that in Australia too. And that had a huge impact on the population, but also on the breeding success rate, which was only at about 4%, so way below replacement. But the news has been pretty good in the years since. So can you give us a bit of a background about that? And then let's talk about the really good news for the bird.
Sure. Okay. So we are American Bird Conservancy, and this is a project we support by Aquasis. And this project is run by Weber Girao and Karina Lineras. And there are a couple teams. She's a botanist, he's an ornithologist. So they're the ones who are doing all this amazing conservation work. Um, yeah, we have to understand the whole setting. So the where the Ariape Manikin is found is in the center of what they call Cachinga habitat, and Cachinga is sort of like desert. It's not treed. There are trees. There's some grasses, but it is basically an area that undergoes heavy dry season. So there's not a lot of big tall trees. There's not like canopy or anything. Now in that area, you have this very bizarre plateau where it's about, I don't know, 1,000 meters higher, no, 500 meters higher, and it is treed on this plateau, and then this plateau ends at an escarpment. And so what happens is you have the plateau, because of its height, tends to get more precipitation. That holds the water sort of like a sponge, as a forest will do. And then you have that water. Now, the plateau actually leans a bit. So all that water from this large plateau falls out through the escarpment. So there are 51 springs that come out of the bottom of this escarpment. And so what this has done is create an oasis. This is it's created a long line of Atlantic forest. Yeah, that's the distribution of the birds. So the part on the bottom left, that's the forest. It's actually a protected forest, but it's not habitat for the Ariape Manikin. And then that whole line is where it's fallen down, and then further as you go, as you see, it dries. That's where people live. That's the urban area. So all those springs sort of came into a river area, and that's where the population is. And the main population there is called Crato. So the bird is only found in the world and along that little line there you see.
And
And
and can I just reinforce too, where we've got that little line? I think that's what about. I think there's about 30 different populations, but the distribution of those populations is not even. And this next graphic, I think um, let me show that. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? There we are. So that's the concentration of of the population within that long strip.
mm-hmm.
So so what have we got? Five main population centres, and they're only like 300. It's only 300 acres or something in
Yeah,
total land area. I mean, so
yeah,
uh, it's it's a pretty desperate situation, isn't it, for those
yeah.
birds?
It's critically endangered. And the problem, well, this is a situation. The threat is habitat destruction. You have a city area, urban sprawl. More and more people are moving into that area, cutting out the big trees as you usually see. So sometimes there's forested areas, but a lot of the habitat has been disturbed. And so Weber and Karina, they've been looking at this. I mean, this is now 15 years. Weber was the person who discovered the bird in the wild. They've been, and Weber's taking. I mean, really, this is a perfect example of a great conservation approach, because it's been for the whole run a mix of science and conservation. Often, I find they'll science ornithologists will do science, and then their result is what we need to do is more science, more research, and just keep on putting off the part where you actually have to do something about it. Whereas this project has been working on surveying, working on understanding the bird. So, Weber and Karina are absolute experts on when it breeds, where it breeds, what it eats, when it eats, throughout the year. The natural history base is perfect for this species. Um, and so they've been able to look at, I mean, now they know what habitat is viable, what habitat has been too disturbed, what needs to be done to recuperate that habitat. and that's sort of been the development of the conservation project.
So this let me just go back to this
Mm-hmm.
map. Above those shapes, above that distribution,
Mm-hmm.
is that where the people are living and are encroaching, and what's below the 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 plotted distribution?
Yeah, the plateau. So the
Okay.
below the green area is a protected forest. It's called cerradon. It's a type of cerrado, tall or forest, but it's not habitat for the Ariape Manikin. Um, and then that line you're seeing is really the escarpment. So the thing that's visually hard to capture there is there's this altitudinal change. There's a drop. And then as you move further away from that line, it becomes the dry Cachinga habitat. And then that's where the Ariape Manikin wouldn't be able to live. So probably historically, it lived, that habitat was at least doubled or tripled from the escarpment, and then probably followed forest, gallery forest that went along the streams until eventually it just dried out. But so yeah, I think we're missing, I don't know, well, it could be at least 6 times the area that it is now.
So it, probably historically this bird was in a very limited distribution
Yeah.
anyway, because it's selected by the altitudinal um, uh, gradient, really, that it it can't live on the plateau, and it
Right.
can't live it could it live in the forest, like if
Well, okay, so it's very closely related to the helmeted manikin, which is black with a red
yeah,
cap,
yeah,
and that's found throughout northeastern. It's quite clear that just somehow that population just became isolated. So
yeah,
thousands of years in the past, it was all forested. It wasn't as dry, and then at some point it dried up. You had this oasis that remained, and this species just started mutating to
yeah,
a new species. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
isolated in a small region.
Now let me get that bird up again. Tell us a little bit about the bird, because it's a um, ma- manikin, not a
Manikin.
manakin, which
Yeah,
which is what we would be familiar with on sort of this side of the planet.
sure.
Our mannequins are finches. This bird's not a
Right.
finch. Tell us all about this fella.
Well, they're Pipridae, the family of mannequins. They're all kind of similar. Like for identifying the body shape is quite clear. The I would say it's pretty safe to say the majority of them are lekking species. So you get males with very vibrant, colorful plumages. They're the dancing birds. So maybe people have seen they do these. They can do this sort of what was it called? The Michael Jackson walk along
The
the
moon,
stick or
the
something. The
moonwalk,
moonwalk, yeah. They'll
the
do
moonwalk.
this little thing. They'll hop all over each other. They're found throughout. They're America's birds. They're found up in Central America all the way down to South America, Argentina. There, uh, quite vocal, and the females usually are very cryptic. So many times when you see a female, it's hard to identify the female. It's just a green drab bird. But the Ariape Manikin is the same like that. Um, yeah, they're this one's mostly a fruit eater, and then usually while nesting, they start picking out insects for chicks. Um,
Uh, what's the population estimate of that of the bird now?
uh, well, I think it's around 400. But so what we're looking at, and what sort of Weber's science. We can talk about this, some of the actions they're doing, because it's I'm really impressed with this program and the creative ideas that are coming into it. Well, I'll explain this. So what Weber sort of studied the population, doing surveys, and found there was a decline. So it was continually declining, and he averaged it to be about 30%. This was through El Nino, and so the El Nino effect, where Brazil went through a very bad dry season, it's about 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, where some areas the rainy season it just didn't rain. They missed a whole year of rainy season. It affected quite a few bird populations. So they estimate the population declined around 25% of that. And luckily, since 2019, it started raining again. The populations have started increasing. So I think he's estimating a 4% increase each year. And what they're working on, this is one of the projects we're keen to help them with. This is Karina as a botanist. So they've been looking at what they think the main decline was not predation. Nesting success was good, but yet the bird numbers were not increasing. And they think the main part is every year in the area there is a strong dry season, and as most areas that have dry season, that's a very tough period of the year for these birds to survive. But there are certain plants that are fruiting during that dry season. And so right now, I think they're looking at about 50 species, Karina, where they're going to look at if she can plant those species that would give fruit during the dry period. So to species specifically make sure that there's enough food available in its habitat for that species. So it's a little bit of management, gardening manages for the species. And something that I think we really need to be thinking about nowadays as we get smaller and smaller reserves, smaller populations, what changes we can make. We're continuing to protect nature, but we're making some slight changes just so that we know that these populations are healthier and can go through the drier periods of the year.
That seems like a very, very sensible sort of decision-making process, especially next to really disturbed habitat where humans are encroaching, because the likelihood is that there is going to be non-preferred invasive species that will be planted by people on the top side of the reserve. And the last thing you want is those species that the bird doesn't use and can't use invading any of the available space, because plants will do that within the reserve. So it seems to make sense that any intervention in the reserve will be vegetation that the target species will make use of, not that some other species might then be able to come in and compete with. So how far is that work, or is there a general consensus among the managers of the land that that's what should be happening?
ABC has supported Aquasis in their project, and we've helped them to buy 170 acres of land for protection. So that's 2 reserves called Oasis Ariape Reserve. We also have a proposal. We're preparing to purchase some more areas, but that really allows that kind of habitat manipulation to occur, opposed to going on private land. And that's something we'll be fundraising for. So if there's anyone listening who would like to help to protect forest habitat, there's a big possibility there. Right now, what Karina is looking at is what seeds will propagate. So some of them need to go through a digestive tract. And so that's and I think she was saying she's having quite success. There's a few species that haven't. Luckily, a lot of these species are early successional plants, often just below the forest canopy. So something where they could be planted and maybe in the next 3 or 4 years be producing fruit. It is a bit, it's a bit of an experiment to see how this works. But again, there's such a good backstory, good knowledge of the natural history that I think they know where the plant needs to be. They know where they are. They know, the bird prefers it. So it looks like it will be fairly successful. The long term would be to be working with municipalities in the other areas. I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to buy all the habitat of the species, but then look at protecting these other areas. And that's always more difficult. That it requires education, because a lot of these areas are sort of, there's a level of protection. It's not a park, but sort of a municipal, I don't know if you call it a reserve, but yet there are people who go in and will collect firewood and maybe take out some large trees. It's not really legal, but no one's really noticing, and it happens little by little. So that's part of their big education program. And I can talk about their education program as well, which has been pretty impressive. But good.
Well, let's talk about the fundraising that you did go through and the purchase of that land, those reserves that you that you mentioned. I'll put all the information about the partners in
Okay.
the show notes and on the website, so people can chase that up. So
Good.
we don't need to talk about the other organisations, but the American Bird Conservancy is, I think, the lead partner in these reserves. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
safe to say.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just focus on the role that you had and or that the American Bird Conservancy had, and how you went through setting up the fundraising, and apart from there was a crowdfunding component, but you also had to go out and seek funding from other bodies. So, because it's a lot of work. So I really want other people who have never been through the process to understand what you had to do and how long it took.
So part of my job is the program. I'm not the fundraising person at ABC, but I was certainly involved in the whole process. And what ABC does, yes, a campaign. We put together the proposal. It's reviewed. And if ABC decides this is what they want to support, and it's brought to the fundraising team. The team is composed of friends, foundations. ABC doesn't have sort of a pot of money that it just pulls from. It basically is taking a project and then showing the world that this is important and looking at what groups would be interested in supporting the project.
Can I just interrupt there, Bennett, too?
Yeah.
Because everyone has to understand how competitive it is to get $1, because because there are other program coordinators and other fundraisers within American Bird Conservancy from other parts of South America, Central America, North America, all wanting to get support to undertake the next sort of focused fundraising effort, aren't there? So somebody wins, but somebody loses.
Yep. Well, that's it. That's why, when we did the strategy, it was, there's lots of great projects that we're not supporting that we'd like to, but there's just not the money available. The Ariape Manikin, it's a priority. It's critically endangered, and it's, I'm working actually as we're talking now. I'm putting together sort of a fundraising drive of the top 10 most threatened birds in Brazil, to sort of bring attention to some of these species that and definitely the Ariape Manikin is on that list. So yeah, I mean, luckily, it's also a pretty good looking bird, which does help. It's really hard to raise money for little tiny brown birds. It's amazing. But people do get it. One nice element of the conservation action is that it is protecting forest as well, and habitat protection, and that's one of the easier things to raise money for, is habitat protection. Almost in a way, I think climate change has sort of opened the eyes for many people, and they're more aware that we do need to stop deforestation. So that sort of helped.
Of course, I just put up the picture of the little greeny brown bird, which is the female. In a way, let's put the male back up on screen again. He's helped out by the fact that he's a very stunning looking fellow, isn't he?
Yeah.
But if we go back to Mrs., there's Mrs.
Exactly.
Now
that would have been a harder funding job.
That's right, and it's not right or it's not wrong or anything. It's just a simple fact that iconic species that are cute and cuddly or beautiful and striking will always attract funding. Even though if this species was not dimorphic and was a little green brown bird, the population statistics are still the same. They are still absolutely teetering on the brink. Although
Right.
this species does look to be, as you've explained, because of its habitat preferences, amazingly resilient.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's just a human reality. Um, Almost in a way, maybe if it was a little brown bird, we might actually take the slant of protecting forest more and say, oh, by the way, there's this really endangered bird, but use the forest as the. So that's just because I think saving a forest is probably more people would be interested in that than saving a little brown bird. But this Ariape Manikin, okay, they get why we have to keep that guy going. That's obvious.
Yeah, and look, I think I've got my fingers crossed here, but I
Mhm.
think that here in Australia we have turned the corner that you saving the species is a little bit pointless if you don't save where it has to live.
Right.
So that I hope, only time will tell, but I hope we have moved to the point we are now saving intact habitats or habitats that can be improved to be really suitable living quarters for all of those species. And of course, if there's a flagship species that is
Mm.
critically endangered, there's probably a half a dozen or a dozen more species in that system which might
Mhm.
be threatened or vulnerable or or endangered, not critically endangered, so that everybody
Mhm.
benefits by saving the big old tree as well as the grass and all the bushes. So
Right.
fingers
So
crossed,
let me
fingers crossed.
on
Yeah.
on that flagship. That was part of Weber and Karina's project. Is sort of the Pride campaign of getting the people in the area to know that bird and to know that it really depends upon them to protect this bird. And that doesn't always work. Well, it works a lot, actually. But we have there's an example in the U.S. with the spotted owl where that seemed to backfire. But it's that was really taken on well. And Weber has all these examples of. He just sent me one recently. It's a barber shop, and their logo is a picture of the male Ariape Manikin, and there's a taxi service, and there's sort of municipal signs. But um, that's always a really important step if you can get local people to support it and not be against it. And there's another project we have in Brazil, and unfortunately, that bird has become for them a representation of stopping their farming practices. And they see that bird. If the bird is present, that means they're not going to be able to farm. And so that's if you don't have local community support, the conservation is a lot harder. So they've done again a phenomenal job of that. And so the municipality, I mean, they're not putting in a whole lot of money into this. The northeastern region of Brazil is one of the poorer regions of Brazil. So there really isn't a lot of money there to make parks. Brazil's odd that it's a wealthier country in Latin America, but the wealth tends to be around the cities of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And so there they have very good parks, almost to a developed world standard. Whereas when you go to more of the poorer regions, they're neglected. They don't have as much funding. The laws are not as well enforced, which we're finding is the biggest problem. So for example, there's a law which is an amazing a law in Brazil, which you register your reserve as a regional private reserve, a private natural reserve. When it's registered as a natural reserve, Brazilian law, it will forever be a private reserve. Doesn't matter. There's nothing that can change that law. There's nothing that you can't buy it someone else and sell it or make an exchange. Once that area is registered as a private reserve, it's a private reserve forever, perpetuity. Um, but those private reserves in areas that are poorer the environmental police aren't really there, and people are going in and making little banana plantations in the middle. No one's really noticing. So there's this great infrastructure, but it's not always well enforced. So then community support, making sure that people support it is really important. making sure that people value that this is their species they can protect, and this has worked very well in the region.
One of the things that people often talk about as being a big positive for conservation is tourism based on, um, obviously we're going to be talking about bird watchers.
Uh-huh.
Now you've lived and worked in different places in Central and South America. Um, uh, this is going to have to be an opinion
Uh-huh.
question, Bennett.
Sure.
What's your gut feeling on whether an area like that northeastern, poorer, depressed, subsistence farming region in Brazil could actually uh, get enough bird watching and animal watching, photographers and 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 just bird nerds ticking off lists
Hmm.
to change that perception of a bird being a threat to their way of life rather than actually bringing foreign currency into the area.
Um, I don't. It's not going to save everything. It's not the end all solution. But I really think there is a high possibility, high value there. What we've been working on, and so you'll put this down, but there's a group called Brazilian Birders Experts, and one of the guys there, Ciro, he's worked in conservation there. He helps me a lot when when I'm asking him how's this bird doing, and he takes his bird groups in that area, and they've put together a route for the northeastern Brazil. And so they visit the Baturité forest with the gray-breasted parakeet. That's like a day there. Then they go down, they visit the Ariape Manikin. Then they visit the Lear's macaw breeding cliff, which is absolutely phenomenal. And
Yep.
then they travel to the Atlantic forest, another reserve we're supporting by Save Brasil, Serra do Urubu, and they've spent a few days in the Atlantic forest. Um, I think that it has a lot of potential to grow. It has for our reserves, it could be a important piece of support. So we're actually working on sustainability campaigns for these reserves that we're supporting. And we're looking at maybe ecotourism could be 30, 40% of the protection costs. So it's not going to be everything, but it's great. Brazil's great. South America's great. As far as bird watchers, I know when they come, they love it. I'll add on something else there. So now they're coming and seeing Lear's macaw, and it looks like maybe in the next 2-3 years they might be able to add in Spix's macaw there as part of that sort of northeastern route. And there's also the area of the blue-eyed grand. So there's some uh, really great birds to see, and but I'm not going to say, is it possible that the market could increase by 70%? Yes. Would that be enough to cover all the conservation priorities? No. But could it help? Yes.
Yeah. I,
So that's the part.
I think what I was sort of interested in is I don't think there's ever, I just think that the job is too big to expect that a bunch of photographers and binocular carrying list tickers are going to cover all the costs. But what I would hope, and it's really encouraging that there is that sort of trail, a week long tour that is being organised. Mm-hmm. That means people can come in, they're spending money in hotels, they're buying fuel, mm-hmm. There's maybe a bus hire company or a car rental company benefiting, and then that negative view of the bird locking up farmland or something like that, or stopping our sawmill or whatever it is, stopping me growing bananas, mm-hmm. means that all sorts of segments of the economy are more positive to these people, and that it, if it becomes firmly established and some of the big tours get involved, they're big spending tourists. They're not they're not the kind of tourist that I would be, which is a meager backpacker looking for the cheapest way to get around. But they're retirees who are spending their life savings going around the world watching birds. So hopefully that's a really, really positive positive thing. Okay, we've got right off the crowdfunding part of the of the project. Tell us about that, and then tell us about the grants that you got, or that the project got from other sources, like other foundations or other conservation bodies.
Right. Well, what? So I've been working with. Sorry, is that dinging? I'm getting messages here. Oh,
no,
okay,
that's it.
it's on my ears. I'm getting. So we've been working with a partner, Aquasis and Weber and Carina, and basically the project is. I before COVID, I would visit the project at least once a year and sit down with them and talk about what their priorities are, what they need to do, and really look at how well we might be able to sell a project. So for example, they needed a vehicle, and vehicles are one of the hardest things to raise funding for once they got the reserve. It took us a while, I think about a year and a half, to finally raise that money. But so every year they've been discussing with me. So initially it was education. That was a very important part when the project was just beginning, and we would put together a proposal, and then I just give it to the fundraising team at ABC. I mean, I try to do things like this to get the word out, but they're the ones who have the contacts. We have sort of faithful donors and club donors and institutions, and then they would decide which one was be sent out, and then that continued. So there was projects reforestation we began, and then the purchase of the reserve, and there was one purchase, and then the next year there's a second purchase. Now we're looking at 3 other areas of land that we'd like to purchase. Again, I'm not that involved but basically sometimes it's a campaign for a specific action. Land purchase is good to make a campaign. Sometimes it's education's a harder thing to sell. So sometimes you might have a wealthy person who's more understands or more interested in education. So then that project can go to that person.
Now, Bennett, just bear with me. I'm just going to have a look at the document you sent me, because I think people can. Here we are. Sorry, everyone, for the delay. Just that with the purchase of the land, where are we? Where is it? I can't find it. I think it's in the other document. But it was only something like $1,000 per acre or something, I think was the.
It's 2,670 per acre. That's the estimate.
There we go. There we are. 2,670 per acre. I think that included the sort of management costs for a period of years too, didn't it? The whole.
No, that was the price just for the acre.
Just for the acre. Okay.
So you can add on like 30% for management costs. Yeah.
Okay. So that's not terribly expensive when if you go through. I saw leopards. Leopards are in that living in this reserve, and a few other species. Jaguars. Sorry. Black.
Similar thing.
Yeah, but yeah, of course, leopards are Asian and African. But when you sort of make it the price per animal, it seems that perhaps more governments should be putting some money into to keep this land available for them. So my question to you, being someone who lives in South America, is how far away are governments, and let's talk Brazil, because Brazil's a pretty interesting place when it comes to politics. Yeah. How far away are they, do you think, behind governments like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, with recognising the intrinsic value of of the habitat rather than the exploitative value of it?
So, problem is, I've been living down here in Bolivia for like 27 years. So, and I remember, it's actually interesting. When I was in university, I wrote a paper on uh, sort of, it's funny that paper still remained. It was on what we require poorer nations to do as far as develop parks, as far as take care of parks, and then comparing it with parks in Canada, because parks in Canada have introduced species, introduced fish, allow hunting, have logging, and yet outside the rules were no, you have to keep pristine habitat as part of a sort of exchange program or whatever. So it's quite a hypocritical view. Governments, I think. I'll give you our Bolivian experience has been that national governments are about political leaders and keeping in office and making the voting body happy, and that tends to be bringing in money and not protecting the environment. Municipal governments seem, because they're there, they live by it, they see it, tend to be more supportive. Brazil has gone through. It's sort of funny because we talk about the east left politics or right politics, but Brazil's gone through a far eastern political movement, which was kind of anti the environment, about more looking at making sure that everyone had money, and then now it has a more right wing political base, which is also sort of not very eco, but looking at that some rich people have more money. So I don't see sort of governments as I mean, I think they have their priorities, and nature conservation is lower down, especially the government right now that Brazil has. Bolsonaro's made it very clear that the rainforest, he doesn't think that all that rainforest needs to be protected. It's not a good usage of fund. There's resources there that we need to take. So I think of poverty. I remember one time, this was also at University in Canada, what they used to say, like if and I think the Ecuadorian president did that. He said, well, if the wealthy world really thinks it's so important for me to protect this area, then you pay for it. And he put, I don't have the numbers on this, but he put like a number that it would cost to not have petrochemical company go into a forest. And he said, look, you pay this much. I think even like the European Union paid like a quarter of it, but he never raised the money. So, it's the argument has always been like, well, your nations developed in a very destructive fashion, and then you're saying to poor nations, you need to develop in a different way, and you need to be more conscientious than we were, but we're not going to help you. So it's I don't see that as the way. I wouldn't put a lot of
No, I think I'm hoping that there's a bit more of a flexible approach. I mean, I'm still trying to understand how carbon credits are going to help. Because people always say, "Oh, carbon credits, it's going to be great." But when I look at how the Australian government is talking about carbon credits, is that what they want to do is continue to rely on coal and natural gas as big exporters, and producing iron ore, exporting iron ore to countries that refine it in a way that is really damaging. But don't worry, we'll purchase carbon credits, which means that we are then telling the poor nations of the world that you can't do what we do, exactly as you're saying, but you also can't have your farmland because we will give you money to plant trees. But very rarely is the proposal to re-establish forests. It's usually to do something like, let's plant plantations that you can exploit later on, which is not building habitat. So it's not preserving what we already have, but it's an illusory. It's greenwashing the way I see it. In that we say, look, we planted 1,000,000 trees. Yeah, but what about the bushes and the weeds and the, and the climbers and everything else that's required?
Right.
And they go, well, what more do you want? We've planted 1,000,000 trees. Well, I don't want 1,000,000 trees. I want 1,000,000 trees plus. That's what I want. But we still don't seem to be sophisticated enough in our discussions to get there. Let me ask you: do you see? I mean, we're way off the bird, but we'll come back to the bird. But this is really the crux of the problem. Do you see carbon credits and the carbon market as being a positive in the way that you understand it?
It could be. And I think right now, we've got groups that have approached us and they're sort of saying, you have a reserve. So tell us, let's figure out the carbon credit and carbon amount, and we'll give you credit for that. So that would be great. But I think if people who are doing conservation projects and protecting important forests, then that could be very helpful. I fear that, as you're saying, that that you will get groups more economically driven groups that will realize that, well, I'll just buy this area and plant it with the fastest growing tree that will take over. Claim. I remember a botanist woman was telling me that they always talk about how many trees are planted, and they really should talk about how many trees live, because usually there's like 30-40%. And if it's poorly done, great, you plant a bunch of trees, but in 2 years, the whole thing died.
Sorry, I'll just take up on that point. I think by looking even at the number of stems, which is how the industry often talk about it, is flawed. I think we should be grading habitat and value of the habitat for the species that can live there, that should live there, and be paying based on that, rather than if you've got land adjoining your reserves now that were going to be reforested, it would seem crazy to be reforesting with something like Paulownia just to make windowsills or paper, and give that a value per living tree rather than a value per acre that the 6 or 7 endangered species that could live there can live there. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
It's much harder to do, but
no, I completely. As you're saying, like when we're talking about the price per acre, I mean, comparing that to a temperate area, I mean, we're talking about 8-10 times more biodiversity in these forests. So if you can't, I mean, that's far more valuable. There's far more biodiversity, just having being in a moist tropical region. And I've thought about that. Usually, what we do, I mean, what we have to place priority are the IUCN threatened species list.
Yep.
So, we claim, we've got so many critically endangered, so many endangered, and that sort of tells the world how important the forest is. But yeah, nobody looks at just the total biodiversity that's there, and that its value and sort of. Well, I mean, yes, maybe people do look at it, but I don't know. There's not like a stat that I can pull out.
That's really the problem, isn't it? That there isn't a scale. Like, and see, you've set up exactly the problem in one way, in that let's say, I mean, I'll talk about an Australian sort of situation that I understand. If we've got wet sclerophyll forest that's got 14 species that are threatened or near threatened, compared to some coastal scrub, which is extremely limited and is almost the last bit on Earth, but there's only one endangered species that lives in it, but it lives nowhere else. By one measure, that forest is more important or more valuable per hectare. But because there's still 1 million hectares left compared to 30 hectares where it's the only place that this one bird lives, that there's no way you can equate which one is more valuable to my way of thinking, but we have to find a way to be able to tabulate it and to represent it to people who are allocating the funds. But if it's the last bit of land that one species or two species or maybe one plant community lives on the face of the earth, that's far more valuable than 2 hectares of forest to me. I just don't know how we cross that bridge, how we can. I think that the carbon credit value, apart from the minimal amount that a heathland might lock up, if you attach other values to it, it should be much greater than a hectare of roadside reserve or something.
Yeah, we have the same thing here with savannas, so tropical savannas. So just humans don't perceive savanna as an important habitat, and historically, there's no parks in Bolivia for savannas. The one park that has it's made for a forest area in it, and savannas just throw cattle on. It's seen as, I think most people look at savanna and think, oh, wouldn't that be nice if that became a forest? And some of them are savannas that are savannas. That's its prime habitat. It's not going to change to a forest, but it gets it's complicated to put a carbon credit to everything, but the reality here is we need money for conservation, and so if there's a new thing like carbon credits that will bring some more money, I'm all for it, because we do not have enough money, and anything that makes the public get it a bit more and make them maybe support a bit better, I'm all for it.
Now let me go back to the whole reason that we're talking, just so I've got the male Ariape Manikin back on screen just for a minute, so that I redirect us, because I can get a bit fired up about these things, which are really, really frustrating. What's the future now for the reserve, Bennett? Who is actually on the ground doing the maintenance of the properties? What happens?
So it's Weber and Karina are in charge of the project. They have assistants. Again, Karina is a botanist. Weber is an ornithologist. An excellent team for conservation. If there's a young conservationist out there, single, looking for a future, try to make that match, because it's habitat and the bird ways. And then again, really impressed with the well thought out project. So looking at all elements, one of the projects that Karina is looking at is removing the mango trees in the forest there. So they've got a forest, and the mango is just an introduced species, and the leaves fall around the area and can be toxic to quite a few other plants in the area. So she's doing, what is it called? Banding. That's a term for, I've forgotten now. Anyway, they're removing the bark around the central trunk.
Ringing.
That's probably it. Yeah. Okay. There you go. And I think she has to do that to 52 trees right now in the reserves. And the beautiful thing, sorry, my phone's doing something weird.
Someone's ringing you.
Yeah. Some people are overly, land purchase is good. Some people seem to think that that's the only thing you need to do for conservation, and I guess
no way. You got to manage. You've got actively got to manage the habitat,
and much more. So education can be incredibly powerful, and I want to at one point put together a little video to show the amount of expenses in some of our projects with education and the results that it gave, because it's something. But when we try to sell an education project, oftentimes I'll send out a proposal. I need to do this education for the local community, and it won't get support for a year and just sort of falls beside. So definitely people want to make land purchases, and they see that as sort of often I think it comes from a business mentality. It's, I have so much money, and so I want to do conservation. So how many hectares, how many acres do I buy? Good, then I've done the conservation. Whereas it's harder to quantify education. Like how have you changed the way that people are acting with the environment in an area? But the great part of land purchase and reserve creation is that it really is the long term, and it almost, for some projects, they start looking at 10 years, 30 years, 50, 100 years, and that really changes things. We have a reserve in Bolivia here, and what we're putting up nest boxes for macaws because there's no big trees that have big nesting holes. Well, now we can start planting trees so that in 150 years there's going to be a nesting hole for that bird. Something that we wouldn't have probably thought of without owning the land. But so a lot of their project has been thinking about that. So it's reforesting. It's so that she's doing reforestation. They're also planting, so sort of gardening for the Ariape Manikin, looking at the trees, the shrubbery that the bird prefers. Also looking at where it breeds, removing the exotic species. So this is, you have a big mango tree that's going to fall. You're going to have a opening. You're going to have small emergent trees that are going to come in. So in 50 years, you're going to have a solution, but it is sort of a long-term plan. And then, of course, the reserve expansion. And another project which Weber is working on is just fire protection with the municipality and sort of preparing. Right now, these years have been good, but preparing, making sure you have trained people on staff ready, have fire breaks in preparation for a bad year. And we know we'll get this El Nino in a few years. We know it's coming again. It's not over. And so making sure we're planning for that. And just as I go through the things that they're doing, then it's also about reserve sustainability, because you create these reserves, but it's really unattractive for donors to say pay a park guard salary every year. They like sort of what they call donor fatigue. They get tired of hearing the same thing over and over, but it's really important, right? And it's really hard to say, thanks to that park guard, so many animals weren't killed by hunters and so many trees weren't cut by loggers, But so we're working on plans of sustainability, which of course would be tourism, a part of it, looking at other things. Weber thinks he's got a little on their reserve. They've got a field house, so it has 4 bedrooms for people to visit, and then a student area with bunk beds. And he's looking at having sort of student ecological courses occur on the reserve, and that covering some of the costs, and then looking at things like endowments as well. Certain people. A will investment for the reserve for the long run.
All of those things are really important, and there are really good examples out there that work, and obviously there's all sorts of cultural issues that are localized that need to be adapted, but it's not insurmountable. But as you just said, that it's a long-term view that needs to be taken, and the decision makers who allocate funding need to be made aware of how habitats are always in succession anyway. They are always moving. The edge of a habitat naturally shifts because plants initially colonize. A different set of plants then take over as it matures, and then it eventually is over mature. Trees fall, they die, and the process starts again. So that there needs to be larger areas for habitat to move in and out of. And I don't think we're sophisticated enough to talk about that. I spoke to somebody who's about to fly around Australia to bring awareness to shorebirds, and she talked about how conservation discussion is always set up in conflict and winners and losers, which is obviously how some of the farmers are seeing things as conservation being a threat to the way we live, rather than everybody searching for a way for everybody to be able to get what they want out of it. And it's not impossible, I don't think.
No, good.
No. I was just going to ask you whether you think I'm living in cloud cuckoo land.
No, not at all. Actually, I think we can live comfortably and have nature live comfortably the same. There, it's not really that hard. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think the biggest problem is greed. That there's money there, and they know it can be taken, and so I think if we had a culture that respected, appreciated more nature, put more of a value to nature, understanding that we're all sharing the planet and that we depend on these creatures, then it could be done. But that I'm looking at Brazil, and we're looking at some of the species that are almost disappearing, but they don't have to disappear, and it's not like it has to be inevitable. And some of it is really because of poor planning 20 years ago. And if someone had just said, "Hey, why clear that area between these two forests? Let's leave it," then everything would have been okay. Um, I mean, I'm talking about climate change, and obviously, but as far as living with habitats, you can a lot of this stuff is, I don't think I've in all of my areas, I don't think I've ever come a situation where it's absolutely doomed just because the humans live nearby, and I mean, usually pet illegal trade was devastating, but that's actually often the Pride campaign. We talk about the best way to stop illegal trade is locally get people to realize that they're the ones responsible, and they, even poor people, will realize that it's better to have that bird in the tree than have someone collecting it and selling it. But then it's habitat destruction, and often it's just out of sort of ignorance, a lack of guidance. Like there could be 4 areas that are developed and one is left alone, but instead they developed all of them. And if they just had listened more to scientists or had cared more, then that wasn't necessary. I'll give you an example. One in Brazil that was sort of a good idea. So in the Cerrado, Brazil, they made a policy that of all your land, I think it was 15%. So you can purchase that land, but you must protect 15% of it. And so you get this area, it's like a road, and it goes across this large area of Cerrado, which is all soybean now. And you get these little pockets of isolated Cerrado that are just doomed. They're just dying off. And it was sort of, it was like a good intention. Somebody there had a good idea, kind of got it, but didn't really, verse it with everyone and kind of say, what, it's going to be kind of stupid to have a whole bunch of little isolated fragments of Cerrado. And why not, it'd be obviously something better to do something larger. So with a bit better planning, a bit more thought, and I honestly think a bit better appreciation of nature. And I'm going to keep on talking for a second, but on that, I do see that the world is improving, and I do think that climate change is opening the eyes of many people, and I see that people are becoming more aware that the natural world is important, and so that's a good positive change.
Yeah, and look, let's take the focus back to the Ariape. I always want to go ondale. I know that's completely inappropriate, but but I mean, I can't get those the two crows out of my head every time I need to roll my R's, which, as I've explained, Australians just can't do it. Our slack jaw broad accent just means we can't do it. But $1.25 million was what you purchased the group have purchased this reserve, which is only 315 acres. Such a small amount has probably secured the survival of this very handsome and important species, because it lives in a zone that it's adapted specifically for, that the others of its tribe, its close relatives, are not using. So that's a tiny piece of land to secure the existence of a species, and in the big picture, it's a really small amount of money, especially if you spread it over 50 years, 100 years. Um,
Yeah.
I want to ask you something a bit about the culture, the economic culture in South America, because you've lived down there for over 25 years, as you said earlier.
Mm.
Um, are the businesses that are exploiting habitat in those traditional industries, farming, uh, logging, and then property development, I guess, which is all about the expansion of the urban areas, which is happening everywhere around the world.
Mm. Mm.
Maybe even managing water resources. Are they mostly locally owned, or is it multinational corporations? Are the boardrooms that make decisions local, or are these international or North American companies as a rule, or maybe European companies?
Um, there's an element of that. I still think it's 80% national. It often though what it's driven by is a demand, an external demand. Like so, soya is definitely a market outside of Brazil. Um, I mean, it's a complicated because for example, in what I've seen in well most of the Latin American countries, there is a resource that becomes in demand in the wealthy nations, and so basically, you just have someone saying coming down and saying, "Look, I'll pay you so much if you get that," and that could be quinine during the malaria period. That could be rubber. That could be the skins of jaguars and black caiman. That could be the illegal pet trade, or that could be tropical hardwoods, um, or right now that could be gold. And so it's not that the wealthy world needs to come down and take it, but it all of a sudden says you've got a resource, we want it, we're willing to pay for it, and then the countries start to develop, whether they do it themselves or I mean, like the guano, for example, that was a great one on the coast of Chile, where basically England sort of made Chile take over the coastline of Bolivia and Peru up to Lima, Peru, just for the guano because they were seeing this guano, they wanted it, but they sort of got the Chileans to do it. The Chileans went and did the war, and then the Brits got all the guano out of the area. Um, so, yeah, I mean, it's not, right now, for example, in Bolivia, there's a big movement for gold, and that's supported by Chinese money, but not the Chinese aren't coming down. They're supporting some of the infrastructure so they can do it on a bigger scale, a more industrial scale than previously. Um,
I'm glad you
yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up because that was really where I was wanting to go without going there. I mean, it's really a new form of colonization, isn't it?
yeah,
The Brits perfected it. I mean, they've done it all over the world. Obviously, did it did it here where I live, and in your home country, the Brits were experts at nationalising the resources without nationalising the resources. Guano is a perfect example. I mean, they strip mine most of the Pacific, and then uh, when they'd run out in the Pacific, they said, "Oh, look, South America's got a coastline covered in guano."
yeah.
um, yeah, so and now the Chinese are doing it in a slightly different way, but it is all about ensuring that the value of the commodities eventually are removed from the local population, and that in removing the bulk of the value, they also denude their habitat and their local environment into the future, which means that they can't continue traditional ways of life if they want to because
Mm,
they've damaged it in pursuit of foreign currency. I mean,
mm.
it's not a new story. It's just a new method of doing it.
You're saying that colonialism, that's, and I was saying that one thing, if we just have cultures that appreciate nature more, and colonialism, the idea of people coming from afar and coming in, I mean, historically, they don't appreciate the local nature as much. I mean, you've got, I mean, my examples in Canada where we brought in European trees and birds and mammals, everything. They wanted to recreate Europe. They didn't appreciate the nature that was actually there. And I mean, I worked in Congo for a while, and you saw the same thing there, where the Bantu had come in about 1,000 years ago, but they went along the rivers, and so the Bantu paid for pygmies who understood the forest and how to hunt. So they would do agriculture and then pay pygmies to hunt because they were afraid to go in the forest. So it's sort of like this lack of appreciation for them. The forest was not very important, whereas for the pygmies, it was everything, you know. And I see the same thing, like, you know, not that, so it's not like, oh, these are bad people who don't love nature, but they probably love it in their country or where they're from. But when they come to Bolivia, they're just, well, and also the people who have the drive to come or to make money, right? It's the same history, right? It's the Spaniards coming for silver 300 years ago. You know, they're here to make a big quick buck, and so saving the nature, they're not going to live in it anyway. It doesn't matter to them, you know. I mean, the big question is really, I was talking to my daughter about this, because where are we going? I mean, basically at some point, are we going to wake up and protect the planet, or are we going to turn the planet into a space station? You know, instead of, we don't have to live on Mars, we might end up having to dome our cities, and we're just going to turn this into a hellhole, and we'll live in these little mega shopping malls, covered cities, and I hope we're not there, but that's definitely could be our future if we keep on not caring. I'd like to think that we do care. I mean, definitely, like I was reading some stats about bird watching, especially with COVID, and how the number of bird books has increased radically, and for the wealthy elite, they can collect all the material things they want, but they can't collect travel. They can't collect impress their friends that they've been to Nairobi. You know, so this is a thing now that they want to do. They want to, you know, have the badges of where they've traveled. But that will help the nations, you know.
Yeah, there's no doubt that that we need to change the value set, and how we do apportion value to away from things and more perhaps to experience and activities. What I read something similar recently about the patterns of the great extinctions, and that we're in the sixth great extinction event, and that sixes is a numbers that come up everywhere. The person who had calculated the likelihood of us being successful and surviving, as humans surviving this great extinction, was about one chance in six that we are not smart enough to cease our own demise. So hopefully I'm wrong, but I've got a funny feeling that when we're gone, there'll still be Ariape Manikin popping around. Yeah. You know, perhaps jumping through a graveyard which has been set up for the last of the humans on the edge of their habitat. Hopefully we're wrong. Now, what I want to do before we talk just a bit about you to wrap up, American Bird Conservancy, just for those of us in parts of the world that aren't familiar with what its aims are, can you give us a brief rundown on it, and how many people like you are working in the American Bird Conservancy? I'm reluctant to say the ABC because the ABC is our national broadcaster in Australia. So,
yeah, it does come up. It's the road building business in Bolivia, the ABC. Yeah. ABC just joined the BirdLife Partnership. So it's sort of as part of the BirdLife groups. Many of the countries have sort of a bird-centric conservation organization. So it's U.S. mostly, pretty much all of the projects are in the Americas. That's been the main area of concern. And there's a pyramid I'm supposed to have memorized, and I don't have it memorized, but I know what's on top is the priority are extinctions, and then habitats, and then we're basically, it would be nice to keep common birds common kind of idea. I think right now we're doing fairly well. So it's about 107 people on staff, I think was the number last time. And we have an international division. So we work on Hawaii, which is a great concern for the US. Some of the most threatened birds are in Hawaii. There's also the Ocean Islands organization, and then there's international. And the whole idea there is really working with partners and supporting people who are on the ground doing conservation work. So for my Brazil project, basically one of the things that's wonderful at ABC is it's not just sitting in office waiting to receive reports. We go down to the field and visit with the partners and really see and discuss. And I think it's really important because to show support. And, sometimes it is just that beer late at night discussing options, and someone thought they would really like to do this, but no one would ever support it. I'm like, no, that was supporting Ecuador. We know a woman who loves those kind of projects and all that stuff. Always sharing ideas. And a lot of what I do, I say like I borrow ideas from other places because I've visited so many things. Like I've seen so many different ecotourism ventures. So when I go to an area, it's not my creativity, but the fact that I've seen, in Peru, they did this. And I heard in Chile once that they did this that you might want to think about. So we have sort of someone who's responsible for the Colombia, another person responsible for Ecuador and Chile. I do Brazil, mostly because Brazil's big and it's Portuguese. So that's another element. And then, we're just trying to be really on top of the birds and the threatened status and making sure that something doesn't slip into extinction, which does occur still, even with the IUCN Red List. There's in a way, there's so many critically endangered birds. Sometimes it's hard to, that's where we are not, I should say that we're not narrowly focused. We're not like we only do land purchase. We talk to partners and, what they say they need to do. And it might be research. It might be they need a year of people out in the field figuring out what that bird eats, But if that's the priority to build our way to a good conservation project, then that's the kind of stuff we'll support. So sometimes we're supporting, and it's harder, but we're supporting things that are very unsexy for the donor world, often research or, education projects and buying a vehicle, things like that.
Let me ask you. I wasn't planning to go through this, but I'm really interested in that there's donor world, and perhaps I need to adjust my thinking a little bit to be more aware of that. Because I've always been thinking that I want to project this show to the masses, so that I've always been thinking that perhaps the power for change and for rapid change means we need to get more political pressure about environment, conservation, birds particularly, to bear, so that decisions are made where it really counts by the politicians. But talking to you for so long, and it's come up so often about donor world, it's made me think that perhaps we need to be promoting more and appealing more to foundations and the fabulously wealthy to actually divert funding that can then be, as you were just talking about, examples that have worked around the world, to continually highlighting them and replicating them in a way that is locally appropriate to be successful. So let me ask you maybe a difficult question. Mm-hmm. What does donor world care about? If they don't care about a vehicle to take 4 people into inaccessible regions to do surveys, what do they care about?
I actually put together this list. If you give me a minute, I can find the list. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Like, actually, there's a good example. There's a good reason. Let me put on some good visual cues while you while you're
Okay. Let me
looking
see
up.
if I can
Um,
find this.
if you're watching the stream, I suggest that you check out rainforesttrust.org to have a look at some of the fantastic projects that they have done, and of course, don't forget we want you to check out American Bird Conservancy, and that is abcbirds.org, and they've just joined the BirdLife um, BirdLife umbrella. So birdlife.org, and here in Australia, go and have a look at birdlifeoz.org. There we are. Well, welcome back, Bennett.
I'm almost there. Hold on.
You're almost there. You're almost there.
I'm actually flipping through an 80-page book trying to figure out where the list is.
That's okay. Actually, while you're doing that,
I
see
have
if
it.
you can talk at the same time. Great.
Okay.
Weber Weber, not Weber, and Karina. Where can people check out what they're doing? Have they got a website, or are they under another umbrella?
We will put up stuff in English. They are under Aquasis. I think most of the stuff is in Portuguese that they have out.
Okay, but I'll do my best to pick through some stuff and put that when I get the on my website. I'll do what I can. So if you're listening and you're interested, just housekeeping for us. Are either of them good fluent English speakers? Like
Karina can speak some English. She doesn't feel very comfortable. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll ask her if she'd like to come and speak to me, and we might be able to talk about her. I really like the fact that she's really obviously into plants as well, and understands that we've got a lot of common ground there. I'd love to talk to her. Okay, tell us about your list and donor world.
So we've put together a book, a manual. This is ABC Sport. It's going to come out in about 2 months on how to develop a sustainable reserve. Basically, for nonprofits in these countries, because there's a lot of problems they're not aware of, and and they have to have certain political states, their NGO a certain level, and to make sure that, and to help them, because sometimes the donations come, we want to buy the land, and they're sort of like, here's the money for the land, and then we've washed our hands of it, and good luck for you protecting it every year. We have to raise $100,000 to protect one of our reserves every year, and it's not very sexy. Well, we have to pay for park guards, we have to pay for road maintenance and runway maintenance and things like that. So anyway, we put together this manual, come out a year, and then one of the chapters is on how to raise funding for this land purchase. And we suggest that if they're making a hefty land purchase, that they also look at some of the less attractive items and try to put it into the proposal, because it's, and this is a list. So I've talked to a few of the friends of mine who are in the fundraising world. So this is donor preference trends. So these are considered to be the from the more attractive I'll begin with, and then I go down the list. So the top of the list is land acquisition. And that is clearly the one that many people want to support. Then it's reforestation. Then it's threatened species action. So, specific actions where you're sort of saving a species. Threatened species research. Then in the middle, environmental education. And then we go further down, meetings, workshops, tourism development. And that's actually lost. Many donors after COVID have lost interest in tourism development. Like, it's not going to stop forever, but they've stopped believing in it. Then it gets down to the harder things like reserve infrastructure, the idea of endowments. People are suspicious the endowments won't be well managed. Reserve management, contingency fund. let them have a little bit of money in case a problem happens. Nobody wants to
Yeah.
do that because
Yeah.
and then the last one that we put on the list is vehicles. I have a real pet peeve on that because what they always want to do is get these ATVs instead of getting a proper 4x4 vehicle. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's good enough,
Yeah.
ATV. And we have two ATVs on one of our reserves, and both of them have a little sign that says this is made for one passenger only. And I think the most I've seen on these ATVs is 5 people, because they really don't need an ATV. They need a passenger transportation vehicle, but the donors aren't willing to buy this. So they're actually, it's sort of funny. Here you have a conservation project on the field. You have these great people who are doing this wonderful work and they want to support them. And they say, but you have to put your lives at risk by sitting on the edge of the fenders of these vehicles because we don't want to pay for a vehicle.
And of course, the people who are dispensing the donor funds probably have their hobby farms and probably wouldn't let their grandchildren sit on their ATV because they know
Yes.
that ATVs are the greatest killers of people in agricultural enterprises in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in Canada. That you're more likely to die on a farm by being a passenger on an ATV than for any other cause.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's one of my pet peeves. And but then we get like, yeah, but if we buy them a vehicle, then they're just going to use it in the city when they go out for a party. And anyway. So that's the donor world. That's how, and so we have to think about how they perceive things, and as you were saying, I mean, it is great political will, whatever. And I'm a social eco-socialist maybe, but money moves conservation. If you get me a bunch of money, I can do a lot of conservation. So really it's where it's placed, how well it's thought out. That's why going back to the Ariape Manikin, that's why, these kind of projects that are piece by piece, well thought out, adding, thinking of habitat, the species, those are the projects I really like to see develop, and they can if you can get them enough funding.
And look, I didn't mean to put you back up there. There we go. The more successful projects where you can actually show how much bang a buck can have can obviously help to draw in more money for the next one. And I hate to almost admit defeat that maybe we can't secure the donor funding for the big projects. Maybe it needs to be thousands and thousands of these little projects, but that each person, each donor organisation can then tick off a bunch of successes, and then because they have to go and find money from somewhere, don't they?
Exactly.
So, but actually, I know we're getting on, and this is not stuff that we had sort of planned to talk about, but you're shifting my perspective a little bit, Bennett, and I think perhaps it needed to have been shifted a little bit. Tell me, how much does PR for donor bodies and ultimate funders, like the individuals who fund the donor bodies, how much does positive PR influence them, do you think?
Hard to quantify. I sort of look at it. So I do a lot of fundraising in Bolivia, and for the fundraising, I sort of as much as possible, because we live in a world where there are some individuals that are extremely wealthy, and at a flick of a switch can make a radical change. So for example, I gave a talk in Boston at a birders club, and it was like a Sunday, and they were all having beers and barbecue, and then that person, and then that person at that talk knew a wealthy person who was coming to Bolivia and told him he needs to talk to us. And that turned into him giving about $500,000 to conservation for Bolivia. So you never know. And that's why I think everything from, magazine articles to YouTube videos to podcasts, you never know when you might hit someone who wants to help or could help and wasn't really aware, wasn't really thinking that it was possible, or maybe didn't know the route, or didn't trust. Sometimes I think definitely I've raised funding just because I've met someone. I remember I had a year when I was director of Armonia in Bolivia and I had a year where half the money I raised for the organization I raised by having beers with donors. And each time I had a beer after a conference, something, we talked, and the donor said, "Okay, I'll support that project." So sometimes it's just that trusting, because there is, they say this in Brazil. Brazil's a wealthier nation, and yet you don't see the individual support in conservation as much as you might see in North America or wealthier nations. And part of the people say that it's part of the culture that they don't trust that the money is going to be used properly, that they've sort of grown up in a more corrupt system. And they, someone saying, "Oh, give me some money, I'll plant some trees." Like, yeah, you'll probably just pocket that money.
But that's a really interesting point. I had a similar discussion with somebody recently where I said, I don't understand why there aren't those wealthy and connected individuals that you've met and talked to, obviously, and that we know are out there, who are unwilling to be heroes for conservation. They'll be heroes for medical research. They'll stand up and be a hero for a design concept or for building a rocket or something like that, right? But I mean, when we look beyond Jane Goodall and David Suzuki, David Attenborough, I mean, there aren't many more people standing up being heroes. Greta Thunberg, but she's being maligned for it, and she's still a child. Where are the millennial entrepreneurial get riches? Fortune 500 people who are standing up like they used to for the whales. I'm a bit older than you, I think, but I can remember when people would stand up and be identified for being against uranium proliferation. They would stand up to be against war. That was even though they would ignore the covert wars that were going on. Bill Gates will stand up for vaccines. Worldwide health initiatives. Can you tell me who's standing up for conservation, apart from the ones that have built a career on it, like David Attenborough?
Well, I mean, there are people in foundations,
No. But I'm talking about the people who have the power to change one decision that they make. Like we've just said, 1.25 million has made a massive difference to the Ariape Manikin. Now, there are people making decisions about $1.25 million multiple times a day on all sorts of things. And they could be doing it for conservation, and they could be getting out there saying this is what we did. Do you think I'm wrong with that perception that people are not saying, "Hey, look, I just gave all this money to save something," rather than I just donated all this money to, the one that gets up my bum, I'll say this, is the starving dogs in different cities, right? So there's all these street dogs that are a big problem, and that people in Australia are more likely to donate money to an animal shelter in Bali than they are to preserving our unique wildlife, which is found nowhere else in the world. And that kind of doesn't compute for me.
Well,
but
okay.
Yeah.
So let's one
can of worms.
the stat for the U.S. I think it's 95% of all charitable donations go to human health things, and then 5% is to everything else. And I think of that other 5%, it's 2% go to pet shelters. So that's just the way we're thinking. And I mean, it'd be interesting to talk to Leonardo DiCaprio, but he didn't appear to be very interested in nature and nature conservation until he went out when they were filming The Revenant and saw the impact of climate change. And actually, they had to fly to Argentina to sort of catch up with winter because they were losing winter in I think it was in northern Canada. So maybe that's the problem, that we need to take people out birding. We need to take them out to appreciate and realize the wonders of nature. Maybe, maybe a trip, they need to more trips to, I mean, we find when people come to Bolivia, my wife and I run a tourism agency, they are almost always stunned by the nature here and moved, and we're full of distractions in our life. We're told that many other things are our priority, but to get out and actually see it, and then I always think this was way before Trump was president, right? But there was a period of the show, The Apprentice, and he had the big reward for the team was they were going to go out into his Manhattan apartment. I think it was like the 25th floor. And that was going to be like the and I was always thinking like
piss in his gold toilet.
Well, that's it. It was very bourgeoisie and all. But I always thought how bizarre that here you have someone who's filthy rich, or likes to present himself as such, and yet he wants to get as far away from nature as possible. He wants this thing. I mean, it's a horrible example to use, but maybe that is also the reality that there are people who don't appreciate nature and won't appreciate and then maybe they'll win and we'll turn the planet into a space station because they want to, the distractions, the films. I don't believe so. And,
but maybe he's not an outlier. I've always thought that he was an outlier, an extreme outlier, and people were attracted to the curiosity of the oddity, right? But America, more and more, 47% of their country cheers that on. So I don't know, but I haven't given Leonardo DiCaprio enough credit. I think because at the same time as he is promoting some good causes, he's also living that opulent lifestyle, which is destroying what we're doing. Private jets and all that stuff. I don't think you're undoing all the shit that you do when you do that. But then again, that's just me being a bit too puritanical. I probably would have been all right in the 1600s, I reckon. Yeah, look. Well, you've put one forward, Leonardo DiCaprio. I can't think of.
Well, I'm not an expert, but Bezos just gave BirdLife America's $20 million. So I mean, again,
But again, let me couch that. Isn't that great? But Jeff Bezos still pays no tax. So if he paid tax, that 20 million could be allocated by the government. If all these people paid the same rate of tax that you and I do, then we wouldn't have to go and beg foundations for money. It's a real issue, and 20 million is a drop in the bucket. No. For an individual who is. He's now the wealthiest man on the planet, isn't he? Or the wealthiest person on the planet?
Yeah, I don't.
Somewhere
he's up there.
Yeah. So it's. Look, I didn't want to get too political. I just can't help myself with it, Bennett. It's so frustrating that that $20 million that Bezos gave could have done 20 projects that this partnership has just got off the ground to preserve one species, right? So that could potentially tick off. let's say 10 species, or let's say 5 species, but then you only need to find the value of maybe 20 housing developments around the world to maybe make a massive impact, but we still don't value it. Anyway, I want to talk more about you, if you've got the time, Bennett, just to sort of run through your career a little bit, and then I'll hit you up with the standard bird emergency questions, and we'll find out how much of a bird nerd you really are.
Can I put you on? Can you put on pause or something? I need to get some more water.
Sure. Actually, let's both do that. Well, yeah, let's both do that. I'm going to put the Ariape Manikin back on and let that video loop, and and we'll both do that.
Okay. Good.
All right, we're both we're both back. There we are.
Refreshed.
Yeah, I'll take the bird out again. Yeah, okay. So if you were watching the replay of the stream, I hope you enjoyed that little interlude with the mannequin in taking a bath. Okay, Bennett, let's let me go back to that side. I feel better when I'm on the left-hand side of the screen. I don't know why that is. Now, for the benefit of the edit later on, I'm talking with Bennett Hennessey from the American Bird Conservancy. We've been talking about the Ariape. I nearly got it. Manikin, which is an endemic in Brazil, and Bennett's been part of a project to secure some habitat reserve for that bird, which has been successful. But now we're going to learn more about Bennett. You were telling me, or you were telling all of us earlier on, Bennett, that you've been living in Bolivia for over 25 years, but tell me how you got into conservation. Let's start with your early academic pursuits. Was that all birds and conservation, or did you have a broader sort of perspective when you first were working in college?
No. When I was 19, I had started questioning the values that I had been taught, that you should live to gain material possessions, that pleasure in life is all about logos and badges and what have you. And I started to think about what I actually really want to achieve in my life. I decided that I will live once and then I will die, and I want to do something of value. I love nature. I love being in nature, and I decided it would be a good route to try to protect nature. And that was really it. And then my mother knew someone that was running a conservation project in Malaysia, and I thought, this is my chance. And I wrote that person a letter. And unfortunately, I've lost his reply, and so I don't remember his name, because I really would like to thank him. And he sent me back a letter saying, It's really noble what you want to do, and that's great. And I love doing what I'm doing, but it would be far better if you came to a poor nation with a degree in biology, so you'd have more to offer. And I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to go and get an undergraduate degree in biology and then become a conservation biologist. And so then I applied. I got into the University of Toronto. At the time, they didn't have a conservation biology course, and they sat me down, and I'm very pleased with how they did that. They figured out a degree for me, which was environmental science and zoology degree. And then they talked to some of the environmental science professors that instead of giving a paper on acid rain, I could give a paper on heterozygosity levels and minimal viable population sizes and things like that. And I had professors reviewing papers that didn't even know what I was writing about, but they got that was my thing. And so I got that degree during that time, and I have never regretted this. I felt that in conservation, academia is not very productive, and that it's far better to get in the field and do stuff. And so I was being, told that you're never going to get anywhere if you don't do a master's. You have to do a doctorate, blah blah blah. And I went and wrote to Congo, and there's a new park created in Congo in Africa, and to volunteer. And they accepted me. It's a WCS project, the Nuambali and Doke National Park. It was 1994 that I arrived. I worked there for a year. That year was difficult for many reasons, and I decided that I wouldn't. I really wanted to. What I saw when I was looking at academic conservation is that the academics would go to these places with priority conservation projects. They would then write a paper saying, "Okay, we've studied this species. These are the things somebody else has to go and do," and then they, take a professorship somewhere and leave it to someone else who would magically do the conservation. And I decided, no, you need to go there and live there and build on your experience every year. The part of I was in Brazzaville, Congo, and it went to civil war pretty much after I left. So that I think that was part of the whole tension thing there. Everyone had to. Anyway, so I came back to South America. Came back to North America, and I was basically looking at Latin America, South America, and basically there was a paper published on Madidi National Park, potentially the world's richest park. And I wrote to researchers, and they said, "Come on down." I came down to Bolivia, and I think within a week, I was just like, "Yep, this is it. This is a pretty amazing place." Because Bolivia, as you know, it's like lowland, tropical, some of the richest forests in the world. But then you also have these Andes. So, someone has said you couldn't place Bolivia in a better place in South America to cover more habitat types. So we just have absolutely everything here. And so then there was the goal to live here and build on conservation. I began naively thinking that what I would be was sort of like a park ranger. Like I thought that was the job. You'd pick it's a noble job, but I sort of thought I'll have a park and I'll work to protect that park.
Yeah.
And
but it's so much more, isn't it? That needs to be done if you're coming in from outside. I think the expectations, I think, are that local people will do jobs like forest ranger, whereas the person coming in from outside will be more of the oracle.
Well, what happened really, and it sort of says about the state of the world we're in a way, like we're talking about the donor world, right? Because as a gringo, and as a fluent English speaker, I became director of Association Armonia, and that was in 2003. And then a lot of my job was to raise money, and a lot of what I was doing was talking to a Bolivian, like for example, who really wanted to protect the red-fronted macaw, and saying to them, "Okay, well, what do we need to do?" And then I would put that in a nice English format using the flavor of the month words and understanding the way the people read these things, to raise money so that they could do their conservation. And pretty much that's what I've been doing with Armonia. Is that I mean, I always remember like one donor who really liked Jose, and I would send pictures, and they all, they didn't speak Spanish, so there's a problem right there. But it was also, they wanted to support Jose, but they wanted to support it through me. They wanted to know that maybe, I'm a Canadian, and I know how to send reports on time, and I know that every report needs a financial report, and I know that there's certain costs that won't be acceptable. I don't know, but it certainly helps that. And like I said before, I raised money one year, half the money, by having beers with donors, and many of these donors are from wealthy nations, and basically, like, I agree with you, I get along anyway. So there was that, and I'm just going to keep on going with my story. It's almost to the end. So I was doing Associated Armonia, and I started thinking about maybe expanding. Like, let's see how far. Like, we were pretty successful in Bolivia. Had 7 projects. We brought the staff up from 2 to 35 people on staff, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try more South America. I actually started with I actually started the Threatened Birds of America's program with BirdLife in South America, which eventually became BirdLife's Preventing Extinctions program. And I actually thought that Brazil's a more developed nation. They're better educated. There's a higher level of sort of science educated people in Brazil, and I thought they wouldn't need someone like me. And what I found is the same thing, that a lot of what I do is the middleman, where I can tell them, that's a great project you have, but donors aren't going to fund it unless you add in this element, and then they'll fund it, and then we'll change the proposal, and then we present it, and they get funding, sort of thing. Anyway, and then basically, I had a lucky situation where I was being driven to an airport, and the woman was in charge of the American Bird Conservancy International program, and she was telling me she was having difficulty with partners in Brazil, and I said, I'm really interested in Brazil, and I took it up. And I've been doing this almost 10 years now. So I've been half-time. I stepped down from being director of Armonia to being the fundraising person, and Rodrigo Soria runs Asociación Armonia for all of our Bolivian stuff, and then I've been managing the Brazil program for American Bird Conservancy for 10 years now, pretty much.
That's a pretty fantastic way that you got into a career. You know, that my brain just exploded a bit, because I've been wanting to think of how could I take my skills without a degree in biology, without a hard science degree, to be more effective, other than sitting here and talking to people. So you've just given me a few ideas of what could potentially happen. So thank you, Bennett. What I want to know is, was it an easy decision for you to settle in Bolivia? Like, did you find like becoming an expat? And look, I do a migration podcast as well, Bennett, so I'm always interested in these kind of issues. Have you become have you thought about becoming a citizen in Bolivia?
Well, I mean, Bolivia does a thing where I have radicatorio. I don't know what you call it, nationalized residence. Yeah, permanent residence. Yeah. And I have to pay like so much money to become a citizen. They don't want me to become a citizen because, as far as if I've got residence, then I pay sort of gringo prices.
Yeah.
If I go to if I become a citizen, then all of a sudden it goes down to what Bolivians pay. Yeah. So it's just the same. So it's never been really an effort to change that. I'll tell you one thing, which is really incredible, is that living here, I mean, I guess I'm older now, but I could tell those war stories of, I used to have to go and visit my mom, and I'd have to order used books, and she'd have like this suitcase full of used books that then I could come down to Bolivia to read. So I'd hear about this new book, and I have to wait like 6 months. And now all of those things. Like I'm totally, my mom told me about a great movie and we found it online and we watched it that
Yeah,
night.
yeah,
You know, so living remotely is so much easier. The books, music, all the arts, all that sort of uh, leisure time activities. It's so much simpler. I mean, no, Bolivia. I have a great fortune. Okay, really is. I work with amazing people, people that I really respect. They're people who want, you know, people who want to protect nature, who love nature, and are selfless about it. So I get of the Brazilian population and the Bolivian population, the filtered, as far as I'm concerned, some of the best people on the planet. I'll give you a little, sorry, but I'll give a little story because there's this one guy for this Brazil project, and he's a really nice guy. And I always think, is he just kissing my ass? Because he seems like a really nice guy, you know? And I was thinking, okay, I'm working with a donor organization. Maybe, and then we met an American while we were there, and he needed to drive. And we said, oh, yeah, we'll drive you. And the guy was bird watching, and he told him where to bird watch. And he said, we're going to stop and have lunch. Do you want to stop and have lunch? And the guy's like, okay. So we went and had lunch with this guy. He was this retired, clearly had money, retired guy traveling around Brazil looking for birds and just sort of doing it, no rush kind of thing. And at the end of the lunch, the Brazilian paid the lunch of that guy. He paid his lunch, and I left. I said, "Why did you do that? Like, he's got lots of money. There's no need for you. I mean, this guy's earning. I mean, he's just doing it for conservation. He's not earning a big." And he was like, "Oh, he seemed like a nice guy, and it can help him out." I was like, "Wow, you really are just a really nice person. Like, it's not just to me, but it's a luxury, honestly, that I get to meet with some really amazing human beings, and often go out in nature with them. So no, I mean, sometimes I go to the big cities and these offices and the internal fightings and buildings and or work, whatever, and I'm thinking, wow, I work with people, and it's all about what anyway, the badges and what have you.
yeah,
So no, I don't feel that way.
yeah. No, well, I'm I'm totally with you on that. I mean, I feel privileged being able to speak to people like you, and all of the guests I've had so far, because it opens up my mind to the rest of the world, obviously, and I'm able to
Yeah,
share that with people who are watching or listening to the show. Uh, but what you said then about, he's a really nice guy and whatnot, I found wherever I go, people are fantastic. They're
yeah,
welcoming, they're hospitable, and
yeah,
and if they know about the issues that we're talking about, once they know about it, they then start to care about it. And
yeah,
and we live very privileged lives as Westerners in so many senses, that we have to understand that the imperatives for so many people who live amongst the wildlife that we're always talking about,
mm,
they don't have those luxuries. But the minute that they understand that it's important and what they could do to help, as long as they have the option to help,
right,
they want to. I mean, they're not, none of these people are stupid, but they have been um, disadvantaged in comparison to you and I.
yeah.
So, uh,
We've seen
yeah,
that in
but
many of our conservation projects, like just not to be blind, to work often local communities, and really, if you want to do good conservation, you have to work with local communities because for the long run, you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you don't do that. But you can't be blind and run in and say, stop planting peanuts in this area. That needs to be for
mm,
the
mm,
macaw.
mm, mm.
But you can say, you know what? I think that the cause is really important, but I get it that you care, but you also have other priorities. How can we get these things to work together?
That's right.
And I've never had anyone like, not at all. I don't want to hear anything. They're like, oh, well, maybe we could leave that area for the macaw if you guys help us
Mm,
in that area. It's like, okay,
mm,
I often when that's occurred, the what is actually asked is not again, no one comes to us like, okay, I'm going to make millions from this. They just think like, oh, well, yeah, okay, if you can help me a little bit like that, I'll help you guys out with conservation. And they want
that usually you can say to people, what would a perfect world look like? And they'll tell you, and you go, well, we can't have a perfect world. Well, what's an acceptable world? And then you can usually come to a meeting place where both the conservation world that will preserve the birds and animals and the habitats, the ecosystems that we all care about, can generally coexist with the communities that have to live alongside them. And you're right. We just need to be tolerant, and we need to take our blinkers off. And hey, doesn't matter if you got a Chanel bag or not, frankly. So, look, let me ask about living in Bolivia. Tell me about. I think people would be interested. Where do you live? Obviously, I don't want your Google Maps coordinates, but what's it like? And then what's an average day in Bennett's life look like?
So I live in the city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra. We live here, my wife and I, because for education for our kids, and our kids have grown up and they've left now. So I'm actually basically looking at, I need good internet. I'd like to be, in a more remote area, nature, and I don't need a city. But the city my kids went to an English speaking school. I thought that was important that they had a English education. You can do that here. There's a bunch of schools that offer French, German, English. That's the advantage of cities. I am really, especially with COVID. So, I'll give you before COVID. So I would be,
yeah. There's BC and after C, that's...
right. So that's funny. So before, I visit Brazil about 3 times a year, spend about 2 weeks there, visit our reserves in Bolivia. So pretty much trying to do something like 6 weeks here, 2 weeks out. And I found that was a nice mix for me, needing to be sort of out in the bush on occasion, and also to get stuff done. And really it is internet. I work for both. So I have a little chart, and I say which day is the American Bird Conservancy day, and which day will be my Armonia day. And then it's now Zoom meetings, and then a mix of talking to partners, seeing how they're doing, what they need. My Brazil work is mostly about trying to get support for them and helping them out, which is a fantastic job. So there, it's how we can help, how projects are coming along, and then if they need funding, and then trying to find out how ABC can raise funding. And then with Armonia work, it's usually kind of the same thing. I talk to projects and I figure out, okay, what do you guys need? And then I'll try to figure out the donors and the proposals to raise that money. And so, yeah, I find that's a nice mix. But I would like to be, I think my dream would be to have internet in the middle of the forest where I could work bird a little in the morning, work in the day, and then go for a nice afternoon walk as the sun goes down. I don't get that so much in the city.
Well, maybe 5G will make that possible. I keep watching where the 5G rollout is happening in Southeast Asia, and thinking, gee, where could I go and base myself but still be able to do this? It's still pretty limited, but the world maybe Starlink will be the and maybe I'll be going, thank you, Elon Musk. I'll thank him for something down the line. Who knows?
No, definitely looking at Starlink has real potential, and for our reserves as well, because part of the problem of keeping good staff on some of our reserves is the remoteness. That people don't, it's hard to ask someone to just go out and be in the woods for a month. Nowadays, I think humanity's changed a bit. We're so
Yeah.
used to being interconnected. They were saying that you
And
can't have a lodge without Wi-Fi.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
No, well,
tourists don't want to go.
yeah, exactly, and good Wi-Fi, and
Yeah,
and when you're talking about staff, I mean, you can't expect your staff to live lives that you wouldn't want to live yourself. I mean, they want
yeah,
to be able to have children. They want to be able to send them to school. They want to be,
right.
that all that kind of thing. So you can't expect in the long term that someone's going to go and live in a hut or sleep in a swag and cook on a campfire for 6 years. You just can't.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
so longevity in all those projects is important, and sustainability, and it's not only sustainability for the environment, it's sustainability for the human participants as
yeah,
well. So,
yeah. Exactly.
um, I mean, not everyone can be Jane Goodall, can they? So, um,
Yeah.
Bennett, I'm pretty sure that we're going to be talking again about all kinds of different issues, and I've got an idea which I'll run past you afterwards. But because it is getting late in your time zone, getting later. So
Mhm.
let's go through the bird emergency questions. I'm hoping that you haven't listened to lots of my podcasts
I have
already,
not.
and that you know what's coming.
I don't know.
So let's get going. First up is when you are out in the field, BC, before COVID, and before you were more of a desk jockey, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. Um, what's the one piece of equipment that you can't do without when you're out there doing field work?
Well, well, I'm not doing field work. I guess I'm doing conservation. It's now a 4K video camera because, as we've been talking, I'm all about promoting. When I go out in the field, I like to try to give something, be productive. So if I visit a project in Brazil, if I can film a few birds and then give them that footage and maybe get that footage out there to get more people aware and interested. So that's the thing. That's my thing nowadays.
Okay, well let's geek out a bit and pretend it's Photography Friday.
Uh,
If you're new to the Bird Emergency, it's a irregular segment, Photography Friday, where we do talk about
really?
photographing. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's been in hiatus for a while, but let's take
Okay.
the opportunity to geek out a little bit. What's your 4K video setup? What are you using? What lenses do you prefer?
Okay. Well, this is the weird thing. So, I had a Canon 80D, and this was because it had the touch screen focusing, and this was recommended, and the screen could come out and swivel about.
Yeah.
I have a 400 millimeter lens. I want to buy a bigger lens, but that's what I can afford at the moment. And then I bought as a backup the cheap Rebel, the Rebel, I think it's SLR3, but that comes with 4K video. And I've read some little article that says, that the video that's in that Rebel is actually the same video that the Canon's putting in the top of the line just at the moment. So I just bought it, and it was going to be my backup little body, But 4K is mind-boggling. It's almost 4 times the definition of the regular high definition, and you can freeze frames, and you've got 10 years ago, which would have been a professional photograph. So for me, sort of thinking as a scientist, like data collecting, it's like, well, I'm just collecting more data. I'm getting, the bird's going to go and preen or something. I'm going to get more information. So right now I'm looking at, because that camera Rebel is a cheap camera, and it's very clear what they're doing. So the autofocus is horrible. It's like goes all over the place. The knobs are weak. It's very clear that you get it and you get addicted, and then you want to get a better one. So I get what they're doing. But so there's, I think it's called the R5 now, and the R5 does 4K video and does at 120 frames per second. and 60 frames per second, which is what I wanted. And I read a paper recently that was talking about how smaller animals actually live in a different time zone than we do. That their perception of time is different from our perception. And more as I film these little guys, they flick around, they take off. It's all so quick. And I realized I gotta slow all this down for us, because there was a lot that happened there, but I missed it all. So that's it. And then I use so I've always been I've recorded bird song for 30 years, and I've archived it all on Cornell, most of it. And so I have a shotgun Sennheiser mic on top as my audio for the video film. That's what I'm using now.
So you're always recording onto the camera, or have you got another field recorder that you use, like a Zoom, something like that?
For audio?
Yeah, for the audio.
Yeah, I do, but I am filming a lot in the camera just because you're in that point where it's all.
And you can get the individual track off the camera now, so that's
and the big argument, it doesn't have to be an auto level. So I put on a certain level, and that seems to be pretty good most of the time.
And you can do the processing later on, so that's good. There we go. That was a bit of a. I'm gonna use that as a Photography Friday short, Bennett. There we go.
Okay. Well, here, can I say something else? Because
sure.
One of the biggest things that I didn't realize that really improved that was I bought a really tall tripod. And I'd always been with the tripod where you're putting up there. But now I basically went to the shop and I bought the highest one that was carbon fiber. So it's not that heavy. But my son was telling me how heavy it really is. But basically now, if I've got a bird that's staying still, I can get it in focus and then trying to get eye level. And all of a sudden, recently, I've just made some really nice videos. And it's like I would say, maybe a good day out, I get 3 good videos, and usually one of those I'm putting the tripod at the highest it can get, because usually birds are higher up. And if I've got a bird that stings, the gold is always the singing bird for me in beautiful light. Like I want to get that. And if I can often, for example, you're there, you've got a blue sky background, so it's kind of washed out. And then I can raise up the tripod and get the forest background, a nice dark background on a singing bird. It's like, Bob's your honey.
Absolutely. Well, let's in the future do a complete Photography Friday with you, Bennett. I think that would be great. Let's go to the bucket list questions first.
Okay.
What's your bucket list bird?
Well, I guess the one that pops in my head is Stressman's bristlefront, and that's because it's pretty much extinct. And I was actually in the forest where it was, and we were discussing the project they were calling, and I was saying, don't worry, I'm going to be supporting this project for a long time. Right now, the priority is to be out with you and discuss everything and not go off bird watching. And then a big fire happened, and now they believe there's just one left. So that's sort of, I guess I was so close, and that's in my head.
Now you sent me that on your list of possible things to talk about in your is there just one left in existence, or is there some in a captive?
They created a reserve, Mata do Passarinho, for the ones that were left. And then that fire, I think it was only about 6, maybe, that were left in that area. Anyway, the fire destroyed the area where they're breeding. They haven't been recorded there since. And now there's a female outside of the reserve. But there are some hopes that it could be in a protected area further north, and that would need some studying. Some people have gone there, but there's some hope still. So
So that's an indicator, Bennett. I'll just go off for a minute. That until you sent me that email, and that was quite some months ago, I never knew about that bird. And I'm someone who is interested in rare birds and the plight. I didn't even know about them Now, this is probably the most critical rare bird in the world. Without without
well,
any,
yeah, you can't get less than one female.
that's right.
You know,
And I reckon I could probably ask every one of our guests that we've had 50 to 60 people on this show, and I would almost guarantee that nobody would list it as the bird of most concern. Just simply because I'm guessing it's a little brown bird, is it?
Yeah, kind of grayish.
yeah. So little brown
Has
bird.
a bristle front. You know,
Yeah.
kind of neat.
Yeah.
Bristle front.
Yeah. But it's not Stressman's bristle hummingbird. We'd all know about it, you know.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh boy.
You know, so something that I've been toying around with is just as you're mentioning. You know, so Brazil's got, I think right now, 35 critically endangered birds, and that's great, the IUCN Red List, but it doesn't help say that this bird is actually the most important. And so for conservation money, I mean, maybe when they first were doing the Red List, they weren't thinking that that you need, you know, critically endangered, they'll all have money, they'll all be noticed. And, you know, maybe they didn't realize the state of things. So I've actually been toying around with an idea which is called emergency birds.
Hey, the bird emergency. Hey, who would have thought of that? Oh.
And basically saying, okay, birds that have a population of less than 300 that are declining, or birds that are less than 100 are emergency birds. And pretty simple. I think it's important to keep it simple and keep it kind of dynamic. So because a lot of the problem with the Red List is that some birds are on that list and they're actually increasing. They're doing much better, but they stay there for like 15 years. So it's sort of like we need to prioritize, and that was basically the idea. And something I've been thinking with Brazil, like I want to put out a video on the 10 most threatened birds of Brazil, and I'm waiting just to go visit some of the sites to get that out. But then also to talk about that some of these are emergency birds. And basically, you know, the idea could be, I mean, easy. There's a label, but somehow get some organization to sort of support that. You know,
I am holding up for you to see, Bennett, my notebook, which I have filled up of years of going through the Red List, and I started looking for those, you know, really tiny population birds, and thinking, I'll talk to people about all of them, but guess what? So many of them haven't been studied, and there's no one to talk to. You know, other than I can talk to you about the 10 most threatened birds in Brazil, but we probably don't have in-depth studies and real information that's known about those birds. So I shelved it and broadened it out to use the human resources that were available. So very. Look at that. We've been going down not parallel highways, I think, Bennett, on other sides of the world. What's your bucket list location? Where would you like to go and look at birds and take your 4K video that you haven't been able to go yet?
Okay, well, this is more of a selfish pursuit, but it's Southeast Asia. And just because I've worked in tropical African forests and worked in tropical South American, so I really would like, I've also seen chimpanzees and gorillas, so I would kind of like to be in orangutan habitat. Just, that's always something I hope I'll be able to do one day.
Yeah, well, plenty of collaborators that you can hang out with in Southeast Asia. There's some really great work being done. You know, especially Malaysia and Indonesia at the moment. Who knows if the palm oil industry will mean that there's no more orangutans to come and see. Hurry up, Bennett. Get rid of COVID and get over here. Get over this side of the world. Do you have a field guide for birds that you use most in, like, have you got a favorite over there?
Well, we produced, Asociación Armonía has produced the Birds of Bolivia. So that's our guide. So I'm using that, but I also must admit I really like Merlin and what they're doing. Just the ability you can look at a range map of. I find that I didn't realize how much I find that's so helpful, but to actually see the entire distribution of the species, and so I find it sort of opens, so all of a sudden look at something and realize, wow, that's all the way up to Mexico. I didn't realize that. And of course, it allows song. And I love listening to song. What I would really like to do is, find the time, but create an app for our Birds of Bolivia guide. Sebastian Herzog and I and Shord Meyer produced a CD-ROM of the Birds of Bolivia sounds, a DVD-ROM. I don't know if it's still available anymore, but to get all those sounds and put them with the guide and put on an app.
You know what people are going to be saying now?
What?
What's a CD-ROM? CD-ROM? What is that?
No, I was actually looking at it. It was like 8 gigabytes or something. And I remember when it first came, like, wow, DVD-ROM, this is amazing. It's like, wow, so crazy.
I have kept my Apple MacBook, the white plastic one, right? That
yes,
from I think mine's from 2006 or something, 2007. I'm not, can't remember exactly, but I've kept that because it's the only way that I have to play CDs and anything like that, because
wow.
nothing you buy nowadays will play anything like that. You've just got to have, what have we got? There we are, Birds of Bolivia.
The DVD-ROM.
Nice. Very
it was
nice.
amazing. It should be all online.
Nice. Well, I'll hunt everything down and link it where appropriate.
Yeah.
Magnificent. Okay. Let me hit you with the really hard question, Bennett. What's your favourite bird?
Do I have to pick a favorite?
Well, there's all sorts of ways people have found to answer this question. Yeah. The question is out there for you to answer.
I think it's going to be the blue-throated macaw. That's a program we've been working. It's an endemic macaw to Bolivia. I love many different. I could easily pick a favorite bird of every family. But that's something. I was just filming it 3 weeks ago. We're working on the nest box. The nest box program has had over 100 chicks fledged from boxes. We've watched this population increase. I've started falling in love with the habitat where it lives in. So, and it's an intelligent bird. Does some great vocalizations. That's on the top of the list, pretty much.
That's good. That's a pretty good effort that you're able to even come down to one. Sometimes people will have to come down to a genius or even a family or whatnot, because it's very very difficult. I will share with you, Bennett, what somebody told me about the answer, and I believe this is the definitive answer of what is the best bird.
Okay.
The last bird you saw.
Yeah. Okay.
I think when we've been talking about how some of the projects that ABC are doing are on your pyramid, you've got to keep birds common, and we've got to value little brown birds. So I think if we can all take that on board, that the best bird is the last bird you saw, that we might get a long way ahead.
Yeah.
Bennett, we have had an extraordinarily long discussion, which I'm sure I'll rebroadcast it as I said, so people can catch up. But we'll chop it up into lovely chunks, and people can hear it or see it in all the different areas that I distribute the Bird Emergency. I'm sure we'll have cause to talk again. I've got some ideas already that are whizzing around my head. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us, everybody. That has been Bennett Hennessey from the American Bird Conservancy. I there's so many words and so many acronyms that come up. I have difficulty with them all the time. Actually, let me before we sign off. How's Audubon different to American Bird Conservancy? What's
That's like, I think it's a probably a complicated question, but they're both BirdLife partners. So,
okay?
and I think I don't want to get. I mean,
Is it more
maybe
that
they're less.
is Audubon more US focused, and that ABC is sort of more the whole Americas? Is it more a geographic thing?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Audubon has an international program, and their international program is more about boreal migrants and where migrants are
Okay.
wintering.
Yeah.
So yeah. Whereas
Okay.
ABC is more about halting extinctions, and
Yep.
anywhere in the Americas where that's a priority, that's where we'll work. So it could be some little island in the Caribbean we know nothing about, but we'll be there if that's what's needed, kind of thing.
There you go. Well, if I was good at my job, I would have asked that right at the start of the show. All right. Well, there we go. Bennett Hennessey, thanks so much for joining me. Stay on the line. On the line when I hit the end. Bennett, I'm Grant Williams. You can find the Bird Emergency at thebirdemergency.com. Bear with me, one man show. I often take quite a while to get things updated because I'm always talking to someone else. I can't stop myself talking to someone new. This has been the Bird Emergency. Thanks so much. I hope you've enjoyed meeting Bennett half as much as I have. Wow. Remember when I said on the video if I was good at my job? Yeah, right. Sorry about that, Right Squad, and those who are here. Oh, someone new, Murray Sale. Thanks for the like on Facebook there. Thank you, Naomi, for Facebook Care. I don't really know what Facebook Care is. Hopefully it means that you care about the Ariape Manikin and the fantastic work that Bennett was doing. And I hope you caught the start of the conversation where Bennett had given me a graphical representation of the 30 different populations of the Ariape Manikin. So there were 30 along this really thin, I think something. Oh, I won't pick a number out of my head, but it was the very, 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 very thin sliver of land, but 30 individual populations, but most of them were in 5 different spots. And this project that we were talking about the whole time, or most of the time, bought the land to safeguard one of those major populations. The bird had been estimated to be down to 30 individuals, and around the time that this project started, there were estimated to be about 300. So still critically endangered, but far more secure just simply because of those activities. I hope you enjoyed that. I will be actually writing an email for Bennett tonight. I hadn't listened back to this, and I'd forgotten how much ground we'd covered. And look, it just makes sense to try and do something regularly with Bennett because he's plugged into so many great projects and so many amazing birds. So yeah, and look, Riot Squad, I got an email from Holly. So the next Monday with Holly will be basically a month away February the 6th. So that will be a while ago. Naomi, what have you got? Yeah, thanks, Naomi. Look, Naomi's just said that she saw the graph and it was good talk and enjoyed it. And she said thank you for such interesting content. I look for it, Naomi. Sometimes it's not easy to find, and I try and find things that I haven't seen in like the regular media. Because if a project's been covered in The Guardian and The Conversation and on the BBC and on any of the breakfast shows on any of the major continents, well, they don't really need me to give them a boost. I want to find the people who are working on things that are not getting the boost. And I mean, what a fascinating career Bennett has had. And in the run-up to the end of the year, we did that show about who are your conservation heroes. Now, I forgot Bennett. How much impact has Bennett and his team, but do you see how much impact one person can make? And when we had this conversation, Bezos was the richest man in the world, and Elon Musk, I think, was number 2. But we mentioned Bill Gates, and Bill Gates is going to give away all his fortune. Well, start giving it away now. But they always want to control everything. Give the American Bird Conservancy one of your billions. You know, what was that Oxfam report that they put out a couple of years ago that 29 people in the world control the equivalent amount of resources as 80% of the people in the world. It's not hard to work out why things are stuffed up. But anyway, let's. I'm going to make a conscious effort to be far more positive. And look how positive Bennett is, and he must be banging his head against the proverbial wall. In so many cases, but he's finding a way to get it done. I admire the bloke. Fantastic stuff. So, all right, bird nerds, the flock. I'm not sure what might happen tomorrow. Tomorrow might just be a day of me working on the site and getting things happening. I'm not happy that I'm coming up at number 7 on a Google search. So I think I need to work on my keyword research and my putting some text into some pages. But I may do an evening stream tomorrow. Maybe get it to try and get either the Americas or the European and African time zone. So yeah, we'll just wait and see. But thanks. Bird Emergency signing off. Cheers.